Hello. I want to talk today about something important to our people that I hear a lot. At least I used to. I've been out of Native politics for a few years, staying away from uh, Native organizations. I've been pretty negative towards my Native leadership. So I kind of stay away from it. I figure better to let people settle into their own ideas and formulate my own. Take a look at things and be quiet when I'm angry. Uh, Something that I like to practice, but sometimes I speak even though I am angry. So I want to talk about sovereignty, something that we talk about, tribal sovereignty, and it's an important aspect of First Nations people. And this is the sovereignty is not just something bestowed upon a people. Uh, our sovereignty encompasses two different things. One of the facts of our sovereignty is that we have the legal right to tribal sovereignty, meaning that we are individual tribal nations. Uh, that's why we have stuff like government to government negotiations. That's a chief negotiating with the United States of America as a chief and a president speaking as individual nations. That's a powerful political right that First Nations people have that I think we don't use as much as we could. Uh, but sovereignty is not just legal authority or political authority, uh, it's also capacity, ability. I would say that for me, sovereignty is about self determination. That's I'm a sovereign human being, and I answer to whom I choose to answer to, and that's true sovereignty. That's a sovereign citizen movement saying that nobody has a right to tell us how to live and what to do. Now, I'm not a sovereign citizen person, but I believe I have sovereignty. And sovereignty is the freedom to choose your own path. And while that's a part of sovereignty, it's not all of sovereignty because we also need the ability, the capacity to choose our own path and implement our own ideas. For example, we have tribal sovereignty in our villages up here in the state of Alaska, and but we do not have the ability to implement our own ideas. We have tribal sovereignty over family issues. Uh, we have Indian Child Welfare Act, ICWA, something that you'll hear me refer to from time to time here on out, probably because it's more of a political word. ICWA is Indian Child Welfare Act, and it's the native version, it's the native counterpart to OCS, the Office of Children's Services, DFYSF, it's called Department of Youth and Family Services. Uh, and that's basically the outfit that oversees foster care and our social interactions with children of abusive families. So we have a lot of different programs that are lateral to the Western system, and we use these programs to implement our version of society, and that's our political right. But do we have the funding and the capacity to make our own choices? Uh, Now, all federal and state funding comes with strings attached. For example, all mental health dollars that come to our tribes is tied to what's national best practices, and that's uh, the group of people that look at national programs and national practices that are being implemented to help people with addiction or trauma or whatever mental health issues. and apply that to those nationwide. And all federal funding is tied to national best practices. And what this means is that the federal government, through their funding programs, uh, are forcing people to implement programs that they don't necessarily believe in. For example, uh, circle justice. And that's the concept of looking at an individual who commits a crime or goes against a written law or whatever, going against societal norms. And we view that person as a part of the community that will return back to the community and continue to impact our community after the issue of their behaviors dealt with. And so out of this comes the idea that we cannot uh, depend solely on punishment, on negative reinforcement to awesome song, uh, to change individuals' behavior that benefits society at large. And I think this is very true. If you take a person out of the village who is, let's say, doing something egregious, committing sex offenses or violence against other people, and you take that person, and usually in a village, that person is a cousin, an uncle, second cousin, great uncle, or your mom's uncle, second uncle, or whatever, your cousin once removed, or whatever. And usually that person is very embedded in the community and have family ties dating back 10,000 years to the people that he's or she is committing crimes against. And furthermore, that person is going to come back to our community and interact with our people some more. And furthermore, we all share responsibility for this person's well being. So you take a 18, 19-year-old guy or person uh, who, let's say, is drinking and beating people up and selling drugs, and that's their lifestyle. So you take this person and you turn them into the village police, public safety officers, VPSO. That's our lateral, our counterpart to the Alaska State Troopers, and it's overseen by the Alaska State Troopers. So your VPSO, your local person, if they decide to do something about it, uh, they go and arrest this person and send them to court. And they go to court, they get convicted, and they get sentenced to jail for whatever they're doing for X number a month, maybe 2 years. And this person does 2 years in jail. During that time, they're kind of forgotten about. They aren't working. They are not going to school. Uh, they're receiving almost no treatment in prison. If they do receive treatment in prison, it's national best practices for prisoners in the Western system. And that means that there's almost no tribal specific uh, interventions. If it's a domestic violence crime dealing with violence, they go into LEAP, uh, which deals with violence, and there's different violence classes. And those ones are based in national best practices, looking primarily at domestic violence and the outcomes of domestic violence and how domestic violence does not work very well uh, and how domestic violence is illegal. If it's drug offenses, they receive almost no interventions to stop drug dealing. If it's alcohol, drug related, they go to treatment. Again, that's national best practices. And after a couple of years of this, they will return back to our community. And when they come back to our community, they will be broke. They will have a criminal history, which impedes employment because all of our tribes are funded primarily through federal grants and federal agencies, uh, the new laws in place against hiring people who have crimes against women and children or other people prevents them from being able to work. So if an 18, 19-year-old person gets drunk and strikes their domestic partner, that's domestic violence. And if they did that when they were 18 and they are now 50 years old and they don't drink, they quit drinking, they quit selling drugs, they still can't work for the tribe as a counselor or as an interventionist, as ICWA. They can't access ICWA dollars or most tribal dollars due to their criminal history. And so the prison system that we have returns to us a person who's been in a very toxic environment where violence and watching your back and individualism and such like are really, really, really important to survive in prison. And they come back to our community and they have this mindset in their mind. While they were in prison, if they had children, if they had family members that they looked out for, the community has to cover for them. When they come back, they aren't going to have hunting equipment. They aren't going to have access to hunting equipment. They aren't going to have access to good jobs. They're going to be pissed off at their community. Their community is going to be labeling them. God forbid it's a crime that they have to register for. And that's pretty much where we turned. The person is considered having paid their debt to society, and we're done. And I don't think that's the model that any tribe wants to implement. I don't think that any of our leaders agree with that so-called justice system, intervention system of social control, making sure that kids don't get hurt, women don't get hurt, men don't get hurt, making sure that we have a peaceful, functioning society. Not many Native leaders truly believe that the Western justice system delivers either justice or improves our system. And yet we are tied to it. We don't have the sovereignty to enforce our own laws. When we look at things like domestic violence, circle justice is not a funded program. If it is funded, it's funded in such a way that implementing it is almost impossible. There's crimes that we cannot use circle justice for, that we have to use the state law. Uh, and we are basically hamstrung by funding. If we want to intervene on behalf of families, we can't intervene on those with those families unless they reach a certain point of dysfunction, and then you could start to spend money on that family. For example, a family that's struggling with addiction but hasn't beaten their children yet and haven't neglected their children to the point of, let's say, one of the children having a frozen foot or one of the children having an injury, or if they're just fairly abusive to their children and they're cussing at their children and swearing at their children and terrifying their children, but they are not beating their children yet. The interventions of federal dollars is hard to access for a parent who's struggling through that. And furthermore, a parent who is struggling with alcoholism or parenting overall cannot access ICWA dollars without having OCS at their doorstep. And no indigenous person uh, in the state of Alaska wants that. I would say that 62% of the OCS cases are Alaska Native, and yet we make up a minority of the population of Alaska. Now, it's not just because parents are crappy parents, it's also because Native parenting is not seen as normal parenting. While they tolerate Native parenting, they don't necessarily agree with it. And there's a lot of part of Native parenting that they don't like, and with cause. And also, I have to acknowledge that the Western system is dealing with a group of people who are so far refusing to speak up against sexual abuse of children. And that's a large fact. That's an important fact. So, with that, we do have a certain need for any intervention. If you ask me, is it better for a child to remain in a sexually abusive situation or to exit that sexually abusive situation and enter into a culturally abusive situation with foster care? What's better? I would say it's probably better for an individual to struggle to understand their culture than it is to uh, learn how to be as happy as they could be to appear to be okay while they're being actively abused. I think it's a bad choice either which way. So I'm not solely crapping on OCS. I'm pointing out that sovereignty, uh, what we want, and what we're trying to accomplish uh, requires sovereignty, and that funding, our funding structure, the structure of funding for this state of Alaska and for the federal government is such that sovereignty is stripped from us. And I believe this is a fairly deliberate choice that they don't want true sovereignty. So this leads to the question of what do we do without tribal sovereignty? What do we do about self determination? Uh, we have to stop and consider what we want and how we could get it, how we could develop the capacity, and what that capacity looks like. For example, looking at, let's say, something straight up, uh, something that's ongoing in our villages now. Methamphetamine. Methamphetamine is an issue, and drugs and alcohol is an issue in our community. Not quite as triggering as sexual abuse, but it is still an issue. And it's also an issue that we are depending on the Alaska State Troopers, the Alaska justice system, and the prison system to deal with. And that's been an ongoing issue from the days of bootlegging alcohol and making alcohol, homebrew, and selling it in our communities. I read my grandfather's book, and he talked about he did that for a while, but he didn't like to see it destroying his people, so he quit. He didn't quit because anybody told him to quit. He quit because he wanted to, and he led a different life. However, there was a lot of money in bootlegging, and people like my grandfather, who was young at the time, uh, seeing that he could make alcohol and sell it to his people, and he stopped. Now, that's honorable. What's not so honorable is the people who made the choices he made to make homebrew and learned how and got the equipment together and never stopped making homebrew. The people that picked up my grandfather's homebrew making equipment and made homebrew and sold it to him. Uh, that was an issue. It was the beginning of alcoholism. And if our people did not want alcoholism in their communities, and if they didn't want alcohol in their communities, and they recognized that, like my grandfather did, alcohol is destroying my people, and I don't want my people destroyed, did we have sovereignty? Did we have the ability to stop alcoholism from encroaching? Uh, Bootlegging. On one hand, yes, we did, and on the other hand, no, we didn't. Uh, we did because in the communities we live in, we are each individuals, and we could all speak against our brother or our uncle or our father or our cousin or our friend or our enemy and say, we are going to destroy your alcohol making tools. We're going to spill your alcohol. We're going to throw it away. We're going to dump it. And whatever we want to do to stop this issue from developing. That's one way to do it. And that's one way to keep it out of our village. The other way is to depend on the Alaska State Troopers. But as history showed, uh, the Alaska State Troopers and the Alaska legal system did not intervene on behalf of our people, on behalf of my grandfather, who said, I don't want alcohol in my village. They didn't intervene to enforce his law that said alcohol is not allowed in my village. The state troopers never enforced that law. There's been numerous instances of what we call dry villages, and villages where it's illegal to send alcohol, and yet alcohol arrives. So we are not going to be able to implement our idea of sober villages, sober families, villages that oppose alcoholism and its outcomes. We cannot uh, implement that sovereign decision because we don't have the capacity through the state troopers. We could do stuff through personal personal action, and that's always a possibility. The problem with that is, again, Alaska legal system. I had a sister who was sexually assaulted, two of them, by the way. One was successfully raped. Uh, the guy was protected by his tribe and by the legal system, and he was charged and convicted of burglary. And what he did was he kicked my sister's door down in the evening and violently raped her, held her down, beat her, ripped her clothes off, and forcefully raped her, and pled out uh, to burglary. And the tribe took care of him and looked out for him. His family was on the council, and my sister was not from that village. Uh, Now, the other instance, another sibling went to a village and was attacked there as well. And the guy came in and violently assaulted her. Fortunately, my sister is a strong woman, and she fought him off. It was a long fight. I was working with her at the time in Fairbanks, and when she came back, she was bruised all over, sore, and obviously had gotten in a knockdown, drag out fight. Bruises all over her body. Uh, and again, uh, the guy's relatives were on the council, and the Alaska State Troopers chose to not do anything, and there was no action. In both cases, being a brother and a man, and being a warrior, and having a pair of cojones in my sack, uh, having testosterone in my blood, being a human being, being a man, being a native, uh, doing what I was taught to do, defend my family, defend women and children, defend vulnerable people in my community. I felt as if I should take action. And in both cases, because nothing was done, I called these people out, and pretty much people told me to be quiet. And when I decided to go and, you know, do some other native stuff, like, that involves bullets and clubs and maybe knives and tooth and claw, uh, to set examples of what happens when people try to rape my sisters. Uh, when I signaled that if these people didn't respond appropriately, that's to at least acknowledge what they did to my family members. Uh, uh, the state troopers contacted me and said, we're aware that you're ready to take action, and we're going to go to the villages with you, and we're going to follow you. And if you do anything, we're going to arrest you. To which I pointed out truthfully and honestly that the extent of what the state troopers are doing is they're defending rapists, they're defending sexual assaulters, and they're leaving them in our village, and they're signaling to everybody in the village, and everybody in the village knows what happened. It's the talk of the town. It's a small community, and everybody's talking about it, and everybody's whispering about it, and drinking about it, and crying about it, boo-hooing about it, uh, and the guy walks off free. And if you want to put up a big red flag, and if you want to put up flags to make sure that women and children get raped, you just go up there and paint on them a target by saying you could beat this person in their house at night, rip their clothes off, hold them down and penetrate them and rape them forcefully and leave them laying on the bed crying, staggering around their house, trying to be quiet around their children, and you won't go to jail. You'll be protected. Their brothers aren't going to do anything about it. Their uncles can't do anything about it. Their kids can't do anything about it. And that's how you paint a target on a people. Because anybody that wants to rape will go there and rape those people. And furthermore, if a person is raping people in, let's say, Chicago, and they're beating non brown people, and they're raping non brown people, and they get in trouble, they go to jail for a few years, and they get out of jail, and they can't find a job, and nobody likes them, and nobody talks to them, and they're registered, and they stumble into a village in Alaska, and they look around, and everybody treats them well. Everybody says, "You're a good man." It's bullcrap. They threw you in jail for that. You're a good man. We'll give you a job. You'll get a place to live. We ain't gonna pay attention to it. You could party, you could drink, nobody's gonna do anything. And then they rape somebody and they get away with it. They found a home. They found a home. They found a place for themselves. And now they know where to go. And they don't want to leave. So tribal sovereignty is given, is spoken of on one hand, but withheld on the other. So what could we as native tribes do, as First Nations people? What's missing? I guess we would have to say that a perspective change is in order. We need to recognize that, in the first place, incarceration is not what we want. We don't want incarceration in our villages. We don't want to respond to these social, family issues, community issues with a non social, non family, non community response. That's to say, we have to start recognizing that a person in our midst who is doing things against us may be doing it against us because the way we're doing things isn't necessarily right. And and maybe what we're doing is going in the wrong direction. And that's a big step because colonialization, a part of westernization, was to teach us that our way, circle justice, personal accountability, personal responsibility for community members, taking responsibility for your mothers and your brothers and your sisters and your father's acts, is a part of being a family. That an issue with one family member is an issue with all family members. Those are true statements. I don't care if I'm a father and I'm a really, really good man and everything is whatever, and I have a kid and I develop an issue. Let's say I'm 23 and I have normal onset schizophrenia in my early 20s. That's a normal thing for people who develop schizophrenia. Now, for me and for my people, that's a community issue. That's a family issue. That's what it is. Now, we could say it's a personal issue, and this person needs to deal with his issues. And we could say that about alcoholism. We could say that about domestic violence. We could say that about anything. But the truth is that no matter what issue someone is dealing with, if they're in your community and they're acting and they're active in your community, they're impacting your community. Uh, the fact that a 9 year old kid knows that their 9 year old cousin is being molested by, I don't know, pervert Peter or whatever the hell you want to call him, sits in them, in their mind, a different situation than if they were living in a society where pervert Peter wasn't raping their friend. So we can't do nothing. And sovereignty is not available if we are depending on developing capacity, ability through the Western system or dependent on the Western system. It's not to say that the Western system can't be used. I would say that what we need to do is return to our people the understanding of personal responsibility for your community, for your environment. Uh, the number one thing that stops us from having true sovereignty is the belief system that we can't do anything. But there's a lot we can do. You know, I talk often about Herbert, this guy that molested my children. Uh, can we do anything about that situation? Can we do something? And I would say there's quite a bit we could do. Sovereignty allows us to do that. We could develop a tribal response to this situation simply by practicing our ability to speak to him, our sovereign right to talk to him. We have a sovereign right to tell him and his parents and those who are protecting him that we as a people do not approve of him being at a potlatch of Tanana Chiefs Conference annual convention. We could say, you molested the children of the man who hunted for this potlatch, and you molested the men who went out with this man and shot the moose and cut the moose up and cut the wood and cooked the moose soup. The man and his sons, who are now 18, 19 years old, and his foster kids, are a big part of this potlatch. And we don't want you and your defenders here if you're not willing to do anything about it. The president of TCC, who makes 400,000 a year and who has the title of chief of the interior, 42 tribes, moving 500, couple $100 million a year with 500 and something employees in a region nearly the size of the state of Texas. That person can stand up and say, Ray is right. The guy who hunted for this potlatch, the guy who is honoring us in the name of our honor, in the name of our culture, in the name of our people, in the name of our elders, in the name of what we believe in the name of it takes a village to raise a kid, in the name of personal accountability, in the name of don't rape little boys. In the name of any of those, I stand up and say, we should actually do something about this. We should actually talk about this. We could do that. We could stand up and say to this guy, we don't want you to sit here and eat the moosehead soup that Ray cooked. We don't want to serve you, and we don't want to ask Ray's servers to serve you and your mother and your father. We don't want to give you this food because you raped 6 little boys and you aren't willing to change. That's one thing that we could do. And what will that accomplish? Would the person leave? I would say, does it matter? What we would be doing as a people, as a chief of 42 tribes, is to stand up and put every child molester on notice. You ain't allowed to rape Ray's kids. Maybe you could rape somebody else's kids. We'll see what we'll do about that later. But Ray's kids can't be raped. And if you do rape kids, and those kids are like Ray's kids, and the parents are like Ray, we're going to do something about it. And that kind of behavior will remove the large target painted on our women and our children. And short of that, there's nothing that could be done. Not to impact the issue of sexual violence against our people. I don't think that coming to me and telling me, oh, Ray, I'm sorry about your sons, and oh, that was so horrible, and I hate Herbert, and we should feast on Herbert's blood and lick every drop out of the snow and I don't know, feast on him till there's not a molecule of him left on earth, cook him and feed him to his mom. That's not going to save me, and that's not going to help my kids. Tribal sovereignty depends on ability. And we as a people need to stop looking at what's out there and start asking what we can do to meet our own needs. It's no different than having your boat break down in the middle of the river and it's sinking. You're sitting there waiting for the Coast Guard to show up when you're floating down the middle of the Yukon River in the middle of nowhere. And you don't even want to pick up your paddle. You don't even want to pick up your bailing can. You don't even want to put your hand over the hole. You don't even want to take the cowling off of your boat motor. You don't want to do anything. You just want to sit there and float and wait. It's worse yet when you're sitting in that boat with your whole family. They're drowning, freezing. I think that we have the capacity to implement change. We have the capacity to change what we see going on. The question is, are we willing to do it? Are we willing to prioritize our future over our present? Are we willing to say that our children today are going to be protected so that we don't have to deal with them tomorrow? And ultimately, that depends on us as a people speaking up. Anyways, that's my spiel on tribal sovereignty. I might get into something different later. I kind of want to hit on culture again. But I pray that people will start to think more along the lines of what we're dealing with, how sovereignty and culture and our abilities can really be used to impact our social issues in our tribes. God bless.